Hi.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Randy Bach. I am here today, February 28th, 2023, with Retsef Levi, who is a professor at MIT in analytics and a bunch of other stuff. I'm sure he'll be able to explain better than I. I have him on the show for a couple different reasons, but perhaps, Retsef, you can take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to and what's been of interest.
Yeah, thank you, Randall, for having me on your program here. And yes, I'm a faculty at the MIT at MIT, and I my PhD is in operations research. And over the years, I've been working on the application of advanced analytics to and risk management approaches to different areas, but particularly a lot of work with health systems in the context of manufacturing of biologic drugs and issues related to quality and safety in this context. And a lot of work also on food and agriculture systems, again, thinking about, among other things, thinking a lot about risk management and how you can use data to assess risk and mitigate risk. And since the pandemic has started, I've been working quite extensively in this area as well, both as part of my research, but also supporting different governments, state governments here in the US, as well as some support to the government and some politicians in Israel. One of the things, for example, that I've been working on was to think about the safety protocols of nursing homes in Massachusetts. So I've been thinking about different aspects of risk management and how you can use data and use data to operationalize effective risk management and safety approaches.
Okay, so that's a mouthful. So how did it come down, and what's been kind of on your mind, occupying you lately? I know there's been some thoughts on your part about the efficacy or safety of vaccines. Where how did the process work for you, and how are your thoughts kind of evolved or not evolved over time?
Yeah, so that's an interesting journey. By the way, one thing that maybe I forgot to mention, that academia is kind of my second career. I spent almost 12 years in the Israeli military as an intelligence officer. So the fact of the matter is, I'm thinking about risk management from age of 18 in different settings, both practical and maybe academic settings. So this has been a journey for me. When very early on, from the start of the pandemic, I was very concerned that the policies of universal lockdowns and that were employed were very harmful, and I was thinking very strongly that we should have a much more risk-based approach and really consider the fact that the COVID-19 virus is posing a great risk to some populations, specifically old people and people with serious comorbidities, but on the other hand, pose very little risk, if in fact maybe no risk, to very young people or healthy people, and definitely for children. So that was something that I was concerned about from the very beginning. When the vaccines came about, I was surprised, to be honest. I was, based on what I know from working with quite a few pharmaceutical companies and sort of having some sense about both the development phases and the manufacturing phases of these type of drugs, I was betting with people that there's no way this can be done before the end of 2021. And I was surprised that, wow, this is kind of remarkable. But to be honest, my first gut feeling or gut reaction was, no way. If that was approved by the FDA, it cannot be that bad, right? Like, okay, so maybe it's not completely matching what we usually do, but probably the compromises are not very significant. As time elapsed and both the discussions about the booster started, and also the first data about myocarditis started to emerge, I became more and more concerned that something is not right here. That when you think about, and I'm really kind of someone that thinking about systems and complex systems. So one thing that I think that I usually ask myself is, okay, what is the paradigm of safety here, and what is the paradigm of efficacy here, right? And I think that over the last 2 years, starting maybe April 2021 and going forward, I became more and more concerned that the advertised and promised paradigms of both efficacy and safety of these vaccines have completely collapsed, and they don't they don't hold true to what was promised. And let me maybe get into the details. So when we think about the efficacy paradigm, right? I think that there was a very big push at the beginning that everybody should be vaccinated, both high-risk people and low-risk people, under the premise that these vaccines are going to stop infections and stop the virus, and that we will get what was called vaccine-induced herd immunity.
I think there's a little
I think that by now it's clear that
I think it was an
that has been a false prophecy, right? So we know by now that everybody got infected, and that these vaccines are not stopping infections. In fact, if you now, after I analyze that, the fact of the matter, there was never a real hope for these vaccines to stop infection, because they are basically generating antibodies in the blood and not in the mucus. And we know that if you don't do the latter, you're probably not going to stop the virus, respiratory virus, from spreading.
This guy you've probably heard of, Dr. Fauci, just co-signed a paper to that effect. It was out in January, I guess.
Yeah.
More
too late, a little bit too late. So okay, so now what was the other fundamental idea of the efficacy premises was, oh, this is such a fast, rapid technology that we will be able to catch up with the variants of the virus as they mutate. Right now, we know now that didn't work out, and we are constantly falling behind the virus. The virus is changing far faster than what we are able to in the pace by which we are able to update the vaccine. And also just the premise of getting a vaccine every 4 months is it's not something I think that that was not the conversation to when we started the conversations about these vaccines. Now so now we're coming to a very the last resort on efficacy, saying, hey, these vaccines prevent severe illness and death. And I think the fact of the matter is that we never, not only that this was never shown to be the case, but in fact, if what I consider a pivotal paper, study that was published in the journal Vaccines by Freeman et al., reanalyzed the clinical trials of Moderna and Pfizer, the mRNA vaccines, and which is the highest quality data that you have, randomized control experiments, right? Mm-hmm. And when they analyzed the number of serious health events, that means deaths, hospitalization, and life-changing medical events, from a very well-defined list that actually the World Health Organization set up. So what they did is that they took that list and they analyzed how many events of this type happened in the vaccine arm and the placebo arm, right? And unlike what you would hope, not only that the number of events in the vaccine arm were not lower, it was not lower than the placebo arm. In fact, it was actually statistically significantly higher. So in fact, what they concluded is that on every 800 vaccinees, you are likely to see one more serious event like that, serious harmful event like that. Mm-hmm. So what we end up now is with a prediction from the clinical trials that for some reason was not shared and was basically ignored, that if you are going to launch these vaccines to the overall population that is represented in the clinical trial population, right, you are likely to see more harm than benefits, right? So that leads me to the safety paradigm of the vaccines, and in a second I will talk about that. But fast forward 2 years from when these vaccines were launched, we actually see staggering population level indicators that are consistent with this prediction. We see tremendous excess mortality in the US, in Europe, in many highly vaccinated countries. And people have to understand excess mortality is a major indicator that basically compares how many deaths are you expected to see from all causes compared to what you actually see. And typically, when you look historically, usually the excess death is going up and down. And the reason is that if you had a very bad year and a lot of, let's say, old people, usually the people that die are mostly the old people, that's kind of natural. Then the next year you are likely to see less deaths because there is a given population of old people.
Yeah,
but
like
what we see now is we see 3
0.
years of continuous increase in all-cause mortality that is actually spanning all age groups, including the younger ages, including the working ages. And this is not just excess death, this is also high rates, dramatic increase in high rates of disability, and other indicators that are very concerning because many of them, if not all of them, have temporal correlation with the vaccination programs.
Right.
Now, again, this is not a proof by itself, but when I connect that with the prediction from the clinical trials and what I see now, that's very, very concerning, right? So that's kind of a high-level view. One thing that I've done, one piece of research that I've done, once we started to hear about myocarditis, was just basically to read a little bit about this condition. Myocarditis is inflammation of the heart. And it's, in fact, when you read about this, there are decades of research about this condition. You find out that it's very hard to diagnose myocarditis. In fact, in many cases, people may not even know that they had inflammation of the heart. They may not have any symptom. And in those cases, if the person's heart was harmed and the person is not aware of that, and the person goes about their life and maybe goes working out, running, this is often a reason, a primary reason. It's a primary reason for sudden death out of the hospital, especially of young people. And at the time, and we're talking about April mid 2021, we knew that the vaccine it can cause myocarditis, and there were also some indications that the COVID-19 infections can cause myocarditis. So what I wanted to see is whether I will see in EMS call data, whether I'm going to see a signal of an increase in out-of-hospital adverse events. Because if you think about that, most of the adverse events out of the hospitals of death or serious cardiac arrest or events like that are involving an ambulance, right? So we actually did this study in Israel, and we looked on 2.5 years from 2019 throughout the middle of 2021. In Israel was one of the first countries to start the vaccination program at the end of 2020, and most of the people were vaccinated at the early part of the first quarter of 2021. And when we actually looked on the number of calls of Israel has a national service, so you actually can get access to all the calls. When we looked on the number of calls with the cardiac arrest diagnosis based on the diagnosis of the EMS teams in the field, we detected an increase of 25% of the number of cardiac arrest calls among the ages 16 to 39, and a smaller increase among the older ages. So that was a very concerning because we saw that increase only at the period of time when vaccination started. Like when COVID happened over 2020, we actually saw a decrease compared to 2019, and then this dramatic increase of cardiac arrest calls in 2021. And we also did some more analysis that, again, cannot prove any causal mechanism, right? Because the underlying cause of such an increase could be very complex, and they can involve the vaccines, they can involve the infections, they can involve some interactions between the vaccines and the infections, they can involve other reasons. But nevertheless, that leaves you very, very concerned. And we actually called for the Ministry of Health and other health authorities to investigate very thoroughly what is happening based on individual level data that will take into account the vaccination status and the infection status of the individuals that are affected, and also maybe use autopsies, right? Of course, this was dismissed and was not followed through. And since then, we actually see similar data in many other countries like Scotland, the UK, in Australia. But we also see even more concerning data. One of the things that actually the FDA itself was concerned about is what I call subclinical myocarditis. This is the scenario when you have myocarditis, but you don't have very visible symptoms. You may have no symptoms at all or very vague symptoms. And the FDA actually asked Moderna and Pfizer to conduct studies among children and young people post-approval of the vaccine in August 2021. And in fact, they were supposed to report back about the results of these studies just this month in February 2023. And they just got like another 6 months to report. So that's kind of what's going on. But two research teams in Thailand and Switzerland did actually quite a good study. They tested people's heart before and after receiving the vaccine. So they test all the heart indicators just before you get the vaccine and just after you got the vaccine, and compared for each individual the baseline compared to what happened after the vaccination. Both for the Thailand one was the second dose of the vaccine, and the Switzerland one was the booster. And in both cases, they found dramatic impact of cardiovascular indicators. And in particular, they found in 1 in 30 and 1 in 50 elevated troponin, which is the number one indicator to damage in the heart muscles. This is the number one test that you're going to have if you have a heart attack. They're going to test you for elevated troponin to see if your heart is being damaged, the muscle of your heart is being damaged. So this is a staggering rate. Like when people say that myocarditis is rare, even the clinical rates we're talking about in the highest risk population, which are young people, young males, is 1 to 2,500, 1 to 5,000. People have to understand this is very high. We took vaccines off the market for one bad event per 100,000 or per one per 10,000. We kind of took them immediately off the market. Here we're talking about even the clinical rates are 1 to 2,500. That's already very high. But now we're talking about maybe 1 in 50, 1 in 30. And every time you take this vaccine, every dose, you're rolling it's basically a Russian roulette where you're gonna be damaging your heart, and then who knows what the long-term implications are. Now, just to complete the picture, there are now multiple autopsies, studies based on autopsies that conducted autopsies on people that died shortly after being vaccinated. And they find in a high percentage of them indications of inflammation of the heart that can be consistent with a myocarditis based on the vaccine. Because for some of them, they actually find antibodies against the spike, which is part of the vaccine, but they also don't find antibodies against other parts of the virus, which basically tells you that it has to be the vaccine, because the vaccine only has the spike. Now, so when I put all of this together, this is something unprecedented that you will continue given such evidence and not stop immediately, especially when we're talking about a population that has zero risk from COVID. And now most of the population is already exposed, and the Omicron, as you probably know, is a much milder version of the virus, right? So going forward at this point seems like really, really, really hard to explain, and really against every basic principles of first do no harm, right? That we've had. Now, one thing that people have to understand: this is just one mechanism of harm. and again, now I want to go back to the very high level, system level paradigm of safety of these vaccines, because these vaccines, they are called vaccines, but they work very differently than traditional vaccines, right? Traditional vaccines, they basically take the virus that you want to protect against and show you the body either a dead or attenuated
piece of it.
virus. So they stimulate your immune system just like it would be stimulated if you would be sick, if you would be exposed to the virus itself, right? What is happening in the mRNA vaccines, that they are being injected into your muscle cells with the code that teaches these cells to produce inside the cell, right, on the membrane of the cell, the spike protein or parts of the spike protein that with some modifications. And basically, the hope is that the body, your body will see that as a foreign body, will learn how to develop antibodies to that, and will be ready for that. What is the problem? The problem is that the assumption was that this is injected locally into your muscle in the shoulder, and then stays there and clears away, right? However, we know that that's not the case in a relatively high number of cases. There are multiple studies now that found both the mRNA, the entire package that kind of is being put around the RNA code to keep it stable, as well as spike protein expressed in cells in the body of people way after they were vaccinated. In fact, even months after they were vaccinated. So if that fundamental assumption that it doesn't stay in the body, locally in the muscle and clears away, that's not true anymore. And now we can have people going around with mRNA in their body and maybe cells that produce spike in their body. That can explain the range of side effects that we see in people that are really covering every organ system, neurological problems, muscular problems, autoimmune problems, because the body now is viewing foreign material, foreign bodies inside its own cells, and it's going to attack it, right? That's kind of what the body is trained to do. And this is very, very concerning. So this is why, people will say, oh, this paper doesn't prove it, and that paper doesn't prove it. Yes, it's not one paper. It's not one piece of evidence. But you have to look on the overall evidence, and you also have to look on what was the systematic paradigm of this vaccine safety. And is it being supported by the data that you see? And if it's not supported by the data that I see as a safety person, as someone that from age of 18, I'm essentially working and thinking about how do you think about safety of high risk activities, how you understand the signals from the environment to tell you whether you're okay or not. And I think that we are now at the stage where there is a mounting evidence that we are not okay. That actually doesn't go the right direction.
I agree with you completely. There's been so much. There's a concept. I'll leave it, petitio principi, which is begging the question. So much of what has been put in front of us, it has false assumptions within the way that it's presented. The first year we were told to lock down, as if if you went scuba diving with a mosquito net instead of something structural, that you could somehow not get wet. The masks were never appropriate. Lockdowns don't stop viruses. We're all rebreathing the same air with it, but mask without. So everything was kind of set in place. I know you posted that Woody Harrelson video from Saturday Night Live, which was sort of for SNL, an admission against interest. I mean, he's typically from the left, and I don't think they expected his.
Nobody laughed if you saw that. There was an embarrassing silence, awkward silence, right?
Because New Yorkers, have totally purchased into this, and it's a silliness, but for people who are unaware of it, they should go watch it. And he does it better than I. He does it better Woody Harrelson than I do. But basically, he said, imagine a drug cartel that locked you in your house until you go buy their drug, and everything was pretty much arranged to that purpose. There was no reason in 2020 not to be able to try medications. I mean, Rogaine.
Early treatment. That's the basic stuff that we do for any virus, right? For any respiratory virus, early treatment is a key element, right?
We have all kinds of indications like Rogaine and Viagra which had original different purposes, and then they were repurposed when the other uses were found. So there was no reason to think that ivermectin, which had antiviral activity and actually won its inventor the Nobel Prize a couple decades prior.
No, it's a horse. It's a horse.
And it was FDA approved, safe, and HCQ, the same thing. That there's no reason not to try those things, even if they don't work. And I'm agnostic on whether they do work or not. I'm not here to promote them per se, but in the absence of anything else, certainly you have the right to try. And that was actually a medical bill under the Trump administration, where for cancer patients who had nothing else going, the right to try something. Everything seemed to be geared, towards sitting there waiting, holding your breath, and then finally you feel as if you're rescued. As if you're in a house on fire and you can't open the windows, you can't leave, you can't do this, and finally the firemen come and rescue you. You're like so grateful for them. But guess what? You might have been able to just open the door and leave in the first place. And those options were taken away from people, and it was assiduously done. It's really sad. And I totally on board with what you say. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I was literally yelled at my tennis club. A guy who was an MD and an MPH, he screamed at me because I was talking with a mother about when vaccines had been out for a while, and she was debating whether to give it to her child. And I said, well, children, basically stuff we've already spoken about. And he wasn't even part of this conversation. He came in, eavesdropped, and screamed at me, like literally, like jumping up and down, kind of screaming that I was, killing people, blah, blah, blah. And so I tried to take this offline. I got him in the side room, and we exchanged some emails. And he said, well, COVID-19 caused more myocarditis. Da, 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 da. I said, well, that may or may not.
We know now that it's not true. There are multiple.
I agree it's not the case. I said that may or may not be true. But in point of fact, if you're giving it to people who've already had COVID-19, young people, then and if what you say is right, let's stipulate you're right. Then why would you re-expose them to the same bad thing? That makes no sense. And so most of these people, why don't you antibody test people first? And so anyway, there was no stratification. There was all kind of one size fits all. And everything as your kind of your spidey sense, military intelligence analytics were correct throughout. I mean, I think most of the good stuff that's come out of this has not been from people who were medically credentialed. Mark,
I want to say maybe two thoughts about relating to what you just said. So one thing that I tell people all the time that they say, oh, you're deviating from the narrative. I say, I'm mainstream. I'm speaking the mainstream up to 3 years ago. Early treatment, risk-based, never do lockdowns when you have respiratory virus, never give a vaccine to not the high-risk population. First, do no harm, right? Monitor very carefully. Be willing to change course if you see that your assumptions are not correct. I think that the people that deviated and became very extreme, and I think you kind of pointed out how ridiculous this was at times, were actually the people that are now calling themselves the narrative on the mainstream and the mainstream. No, they're not mainstream. They may call themselves mainstream, but sorry, we and people, I think you interviewed other people on your show. I actually think that we are the mainstream. They are extreme. We are not extreme. We are representing the balanced, risk-based approach that we would. These are the textbooks. A lot of what I'm saying is not like, I'm not a genius to think about it. This is just like I'm just reading the textbooks of what we've known forever, and that's just saying it back to people, right? And the other thing that I want to kind of relate to that, and I think that's kind of was a lesson to me, is how much fear, how powerful fear is. Once you injected fear in the heart of people, it shuts down logic, it shuts down ethics, it shuts down empathy, and I think, and I'm working with a lot of doctors over 17 years, and I really think that most doctors are good people that really want to help and save their patients. But people have to understand, most doctors are they work in such a hard environment, like very stressful environment. They don't have the time to read all the literature. They are being told this is the algorithm, and and
well,
they and usually they don't have reasons to believe that they are being told the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But I think that historically, especially when we didn't have a protocol that was validated, we actually relied on the common wisdom, the collective wisdom of doctors trying and experimenting and doing sensible things based on their best judgment to come up with best practices. That best practices usually evolve in medicine from people trying different things, and the best practices win at the end because they have the best outcomes. For some reason, in the last 3 years, we adapted a very centralized to the extreme. Like, not only that we try to impose policies, we are actually going after people that they're asking questions and experimenting. We're going after them just for the reason that they try, not even regardless of whether they were successful or not. So I think that I want to highlight here the process that I think medicine has evolved over the years through the collective wisdom that emerged from the frontline experience of people. Mm-hmm. It was never like one source of kind of wisdom, centralized source of wisdom that kind of, oh yeah, we're going to tell you how to do that. It's the contrary. It's actually root grass knowledge that is coming from frontline, and it being kind of integrated over a year and sort of experimentation until the moment when you say, okay, there's a clear evidence that this is the best practice.
And that's the way science works generally. I mean, science is too.
But in medicine in particular, I just want to emphasize that people, someone that worked with doctors for 17 years, right? So
there's the art of medicine where you're supposed to work on your clinical judgment, your own kind of receptacle, the way you filter things and so forth. And science has always been two things. There's a scientific body of knowledge. There's also the scientific process of validation. And historically, sometimes it's hard to do things medically because, one person has a rash, another person has a rash, is the same rash, they have the same physiology. It's very difficult to do these kind of things. And so we've relied on the literature and kind of an accretion of knowledge through process.
And talking to the patient as well. So the other part of this is that it's really the doctor and the patients working together to help the patients to get better. And that interaction leads insights, failures, successes, and kind of this collective wisdom is what kind of creates the advancements in medicine.
Yeah, but I think you're onto something there. I would add two things. One is that in this particular case, it's been socialized. When I say that, I don't mean socialized medicine per se. I mean the focus away from the individual to the social group. So it was collectivized, I guess might be a better word, kind of a Soviet kind of word, that medical care was decided that it's not so much you, it's like what you are doing for other people. And I get this. If this were a zombie apocalypse or a horrible smallpox or maybe, anthrax by respiratory vector or something like that, that's genuinely horrible, I think, we can make the argument that one's actions do impede or affect another. But in this particular case, there were clearly huge blocks of the population that had nothing going on. And this was known early on from the Diamond Princess in January 2020, that there was really nothing going on for the, walking, talking. If your pharmacy, if you wake up in the morning and you're young and your medicine chest is empty of pills, likely COVID's not going to affect you. So I had a very early, easy test for COVID efficacy or for COVID worries, which is to look at your driver's license, take 2021 and subtract from the date of birth. If it's a low number, then you're pretty much healthy. Check your medicine cabinet. So anyway, that was not really adopted, and we wound up having this draconian top-down system of collectivizing medical care. And I'm just going to add a second point, which is to kind of put the heat on medical doctors, of which I am one. But I have, it's debatable whether I have friends. I have acquaintances for sure. But one of my friends, long-term friends, is a medical doctor. He's a pretty notable guy in the medical scene here. He's been on TV talking stuff over the years. And during COVID, he and I talked, and he had COVID very early on. So did his wife and his family. They were all fine. They had it was, cough, sneeze, whatever. They moved on with their lives. And so I said to him, so this is a good time, to take, he sees young children. And I said, this is a good time to take the mask off for them because, he says, no, I'm not going to do that. Why? Do you think you can get it again? He says, no, absolutely not. I said, are you worried you're going to give it to somebody else? Because you're already, he says, mine's long gone. It's been 2 weeks. I said, well, why wouldn't you, take the mask off? He says, well, I said it'd be a good measure, to show the kids that there's an end at the end of this. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, rainbow at the end of the storm, all that kind of stuff. He said, well, it's not really politically time yet. I'm like, what politically time? He says, yeah, we have to get Trump out. And if we don't keep the pressure on it, politically, but I said, I just think that this is a total misapprehension. And they are literally changing the Hippocratic Oath right now. So he's probably going to be in accord with the new Hippocratic Oath or whatever they call it. But in point of fact, this is not the relationship physicians should have. And again, absent extreme circumstances of a zombie apocalypse, I think you have to be treating that patient and deciding what's best for that patient, and be honest with the person that, there is no mysterious virus. I've already had it. I lived, so forth. You're a kid. There's no reason for any of us to be wearing masks at all, and so forth. But to take your marching orders, to think you're part of a political team, I think it pollutes the whole relationship, and it damages the science. And I think we've seen that, not just from this guy, but all throughout, top to bottom.
Yeah, to me, the way I would phrase it is that we basically broke the maybe one of the most sacred principles of effective medicine, which is the autonomy of the doctor and the patient. And we injected to that autonomy also other considerations that are not relevant, like political considerations, fear. But at the end of the day, I believe that the way, as someone that really works for 17 years with many health systems and many doctors, I always tell people, with all the technology, with all the drugs, at the end, it's about humans taking care of humans. And this human interaction is at the center of what I consider effective medicine. And the autonomy of the decisions there, like they can be informed, they can get information, they can be informed, they can be advised, but at the end of the day, it's between the doctor and the patient to make a decision what is best for the patient, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, the patient needs to make that decision.
Right.
I mean, unless they're not capable.
I'm doing some outpatient medicine as a physician practicing, and there is still a mask mandate in all outpatient doctor's offices. So if somebody, if I have a 9-year-old coming in with an elbow, fracture or fall or whatever, and the 35-year-old mom, everybody's healthy, nobody's got a cold, nobody's got a sniffle, everyone has to wear a mask for the entire interaction. Part of the medical interaction is trust, and this is face-to-face interaction. We're doing Zoom here, and we get to see each other. We're not near each other physically right this second, but there's a certain aspect I can gauge feelings and expressions by looking at their face. This is what's going on.
Yeah, this is actually a very narrow. I mean, the other thing that happened to us, that we took health, which is the holistic definition of health, and we narrowed it down to whether you have positive or negative to one virus, a single virus, and we forgot about mental health. We forgot about other viruses. We forgot about trust. We forgot about many things that impact health, and we know that they impact health. And what we've done to the kids, what we've done to the, one of the things that I think is one of the most major failures of the last 3 years is we as a society, we sacrifice the young and the kids in favor of the older and the sick.
Right.
And that's, to me, the opposite. The society should do exactly the opposite. They should put societies with the right value system should put kids always as a first priority, because that's the future, right? And I don't think we've done that. I don't think we've done that. That's a major failure.
No, it's definitely.
As having 6 kids, I feel very personally passionate about this.
Well, mazel tov to you, and congratulations. The amazing thing, if people have watched the movie Titanic, there's kind of a noblesse oblige. There's a standard where women and children first on the lifeboats, and we didn't accord them the same courtesy. Now, I've said this before on my podcast, but my now late mother-in-law was in her late 80s, early 90s throughout COVID. She lived the entire time. She died a couple months ago from other reasons. We kept her in the house, and she was fine. She was not mobile at that point, anyways. But we didn't isolate her. She was already self-isolating for quite a few years prior. But we were careful around her. Frankly, we didn't wear masks all the time. If we weren't sick and so forth, because the interaction was important.
She would die from a loneliness much faster than she would die from
I literally know families who did that to their old people, or with their old people, however you want to do it. Where this one now late mother of a friend of mine, she was indoors for a couple of years and nobody saw her at all. Maybe her husband now and then.
I'm sure she declined intellectually and mentally.
She didn't go outside literally once until somebody said it was okay to go outside. And I've said this before, there's a beautiful photograph of her feeling the sun for the first time like in a year and a half, which is wonderful, but it was not necessary. This same kind of thing of like holding somebody's head under. I mean, I love breathing. I don't really think about it that much, but if somebody held my head underwater for 90 seconds, whatever, I'd be like so grateful for breath. This is kind of what happened. It's like, aren't you happy we're letting you breathe now? you know,
Yeah.
we used to have this joke. What's the best thing about getting hit on the head, beaten up? Is that it feels good when it stops. And this is kind of the mentality. It's kind of the mentality of the abused, and that we will let you have your freedom. We will let you walk around. We'll let you do this. We're going to let you go to school, but you have to do this. It's a craziness. I'm just going to give one separate example. I'm a pro-vax person. I took the flu shot every single year. I'm a physician. I found it was efficacious for me. I could go to work more often. I didn't get as sick. My own personal experience of the flu shots were awesome. I took them from a pretty, moderately young age, in the 20s, whatever, onward, and they worked fine. Yellow fever, there's a vaccine for yellow fever. I've never ever taken that vaccine, and it's probably equally good vaccine, but they don't give it to people who haven't had yellow fever. They don't give it to the endemic regions. They give it if you happen to be going there and you happen to be at risk, and so forth. And it's like, there's no reason just because there is a vaccine to give that. And this kind of judgment and application and striation, triage, whatever you want to call it, was never done. It was always a matter of everybody. It's a brute force method. And then at some point we have to think cui bono, like who's benefiting from
it became, in fact, I would argue that until 3 years ago, we used to have science on one hand and very extreme people that objected almost religiously to all vaccines whatsoever, right? And I think that unfortunately now we have the opposite religion that says, hey, I'm in favor. All vaccines must be good for everybody every time. And I think that the truth is that every vaccine, like every drug, should be examined over time based on the data available with respect to the person at stake. Because I always say, like, it's okay to give sometimes a drug that has a 20% chance of killing you, if that drug is given to a terminal cancer patient that maybe has no chance whatsoever, and it might be their only hope, right? So that might be okay to do, but it's definitely not okay to give it to a healthy child, right? So my point is, like, we lost track of, we kind of went away from the fundamental principles of risk-based science and medicine, where you basically personalize the treatment to the person based on their choices, their risk factors, and so forth. Like, there is nothing that is good for everybody. Like, almost nothing in life, including in medicine, is good for everybody. By the way, even in food now, the state-of-the-art studies show that maybe tomatoes are really great for you and maybe are not very great for me, depending on our personalized biome composition, right?
It's you make some excellent points. I mean, there's no absolute in a lot of these things. I found out recently, this is a total sidelight, but hot peppers, we eat a hot pepper. It's like, we have contests and how many hot peppers you can eat. Apparently birds can eat these hot peppers without any problem at all. And I was reading, it's not so much that there's like sulfuric acid or something like that in the hot pepper, which is what I thought. I thought there was some kind of fulgurant agent causing, damage to us. But in point of fact, it's actually species try to say this fast, species specific. And the peppers, they don't have brains. The birds barely have brains, but the peppers have sort of decided that the best vehicle for passing their seeds around are birds. So they're going to be tasty for birds, hot for everybody who's got, grabbing them, because we don't have the mobility to birds. I don't know what the algorithm is.
Fascinating evolution, you say.
But this is the thing. So something as fundamental as a hot pepper, we think that, oh my God, everyone's got a hot pepper. Nobody can eat a hot pepper. Everyone thinks a lemon is sour. But that's true to an extent, and it's probably for some animals, whatever. The lemon's not that sour, the pepper's not that hot, and these things have to be kind of repurposed and figured out, according to what the situations are. And again, this has been the kind of the missed. Everything was labeled misinformation, but almost everything that was misinformation then is turning out to be true now. And
this concept of misinformation is one of the most destructive concepts that we've had over the last 3 years. And I think that it sounds great, but until you get to the question of who gets to decide what misinformation is. And then sort of this answer already kind of breaks it down. It's almost like democracy is not a perfect system, but like maybe it's the least worst system that we have. And I'm saying that because you also mentioned other vaccines and other, and you mentioned the word trust. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is, there are many issues about the COVID-19 pandemic management, and we need to really learn the lessons. and we need to actually take care of the people that were injured and invest in understanding better how we actually know how to understand the mechanisms better and develop some treatments. But I think that all of this is important, not only because of the specific issues related to COVID-19, but in a broader context. If we believe that medicine and science and public health are important elements of a healthy society and are important for the well-being of individuals in our societies, I think that I think that what happened over the last 3 years has completely demolished the trust of most people in what they're being told, in what is being reliable information. I think that we are now in a situation when you cannot believe what the CDC is saying, because most of the time that's something completely wrong. These are very, very destructive situations, and I think that we have to work hard to change the systems that we have in that respect, and regain the trust in science and medicine. Because as a scientist, I still believe very strongly and very passionately that science and medicine have a very, very important role of enhancing well-being of people in the world. It just needs to be used according to the basic principles that we've embraced throughout many decades. But it also needs to be kept out of both political and commercial interests, because it should be kind of something that we really defend and have very good boundaries, strong boundaries, so we can actually advance science and advance medicine and translate their output into something that really help people, right?
There's a big problem when these things are misused. I have a term of art called a conspiracy of interest. So I think conspiracies don't necessarily form in deep, dark rooms where people are, smoking cigars, or whatever, and hatch a plan. So I think something happens, and some flag gets, pulled up a flagpole, metaphorically, and then certain people salute and certain people don't. It's either for or against. I'm going to touch on this at the end, but I'm the author of a book called Overturning Zika, which is the last previous great pandemic, and that just fizzled away. It's just nothing there. People are still spending money. There's $1 billion research industry on it. They're literally working on a vaccine right now. But the science wasn't there. But the origin story is fascinating. And I started only with a small article. I went into became a book, because every time I looked more deeply at this, I was like, oh my word, there's more and more more oddities underneath the oddities. And it turns out that, Zika microcephaly came about through basically bad science. It was conjecture that got leaked to the press in a couple different occasions. And that's not science, that's panic. And what it wound up kind of like steamrolling into a bigger thing than it was, because there were people who actually, believe it or not, were in favor of Zika microcephaly. It's a miserable problem. If it happens to your child, it's not a death sentence, but it's a cognitive sentence. But who could be in favor of this? Well, it turns out that a good portion of the population, on the left in this case, changed the abortion laws in Brazil. And so this became a bandwagon, to change metaphor, on which they could jump to affect change. And so everyone, and there were lots of groups throughout who kept, the pressure on anyway, the diagnosis took on greater life than it might otherwise have had without certain political allies. And I think that we have to be very careful. And in fact, in Zika, the origin of the Zika part had a political motivation as well. I'm going to save that for my readers to find out. But when
I learned something. Thank you.
When things are put backwards, it doesn't work as well. And what happens? But the funny thing is, there's no apology. This one is,
I think it will take time before people will apologize in the COVID context, because there's so much on the stake. Once you launch this vaccine to everybody, and you didn't just give it to the high-risk people, you have basically no way back. What are you going to say now? Oh, we made a mistake. This vaccine is causing more harm. They're like, you cannot it's going to take a long time before people will even admit wrong. I'm patient, so I think it's going to take time, but the truth is going to come out. So.
All right, so we're nearing the end of your availability, and I'm very much appreciative of your time, and I'm honored that
it was a pleasure.
spent it with me and us in TV land, as it were. So what has been the result of your proclamations or your videos? Have you garnered any momentum? What are your next steps, and what's your advice to people?
It got quite a lot of exposure. I think, to be honest, until very recently, I was not on social media. So this world is new to me. So I'm still learning that. It seems that, unfortunately, the scientific channels are often censored and being still blocked. So it's very hard to convey messages through the regular scientific channels. So it's being left to the more social media outlets. Which is good, and I think that maybe that's a new age where people consume information in different ways. But I really hope, and I'm looking forward to working hard to really start to have back an environment, a scientific environment, where we can actually get together and have debates. Because I think that the way forward has to go through regaining the ability to disagree and look at the facts together and have different interpretation. Without the expectation of apologies and admissions of errors. I think that that's what the time for that will come. But I think that what matters more is that we start to have again a dialogue, because currently for many people, as you said, it's highly politicized, not necessarily between Democrats and Republicans, but between pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. You are immediately classified.
Yeah.
And it's more about your label rather than what you're saying, the facts, and I think I hope that we can break that, and I think there will be some political pressure to break that, I expect, but also I hope that within academia, as time progresses, there is more and more openness for those kind of discussions, and I think that's going to be hopefully something I can contribute to as an individual. But I'm expecting a long journey. Undoing the last 3 years is not going to take 3 years. It's going to take maybe 10 to 15 years. So I'm getting ready for a marathon.
I know, it's a sadness, isn't it? So
it is what it is.
Yeah, I was going to just end by, well, I always like to do my own shameless self-promotion. So I'm just going to
sure, no problem.
end for the people at home with a copy of my book here. I'll make it a little bit bigger. This is Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. That's my name. That's a mosquito. I'm not a mosquito. I don't identify as a mosquito anyway. And it's on Amazon. It's coming out in Brazil within the next few weeks. I've gotten some good feedback on this. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya read my review in American Journal of Medicine. I think it's a really fascinating story because it's more of an isolated one, like a Fabergé egg. It's its own thing that can be analyzed and so forth from a distance. But I think the major message, everyone knows Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And I think if you ask people on the street, who was right, who was wrong, how much he should have paid, people are voluminously knowledgeable about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And back in the day, same thing, O.J. Simpson. But these were adjudicated in a court of law, and it was public. And so, the lawyers got up there, and I don't know which lawyer you like better, whether you like Amber, you like Johnny, whatever. But people are knowledgeable about this. So here's my idea. I just kind of occurred to me is that, you should have kind of a court of law. There should be a science judge, and people have to present their arguments, so forth. And then I don't know if there's going to be an answer or not, but people would maybe have I don't know. Maybe,
that's back to the debates we're talking about. That's all the debate. There should be a debate. So
yeah. All right. I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you very much.
Any last words?
No, I hope help. If anything, we all probably more appreciate of the fact that health is the most important thing in life. So I wish everybody that is listening and watching us and will watch us, just keep your health intact and do whatever it takes to live healthy, and hopefully that will help.
Okay, and you have an unusual name, so I'm just going to tell people if they want to follow you, they can just copy the name.
Yeah, I'm
here.
on Twitter, so they can follow
And
me
you're
on Twitter.
and I find your feed stimulating, and your work and your thoughts as well. So thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much.
Stay on for a second if we want to chat, but then
Sure.
we'll say goodbye to everybody else.
Bye, everybody.